If you were looking for a video that tells you how to write an IEP step by step and takes you through the process, you have come to the right place. No need to go further. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to write an IEP present level. I'm going to take you through on my computer, show you how I write those IEPs as part of a series where I'm going to take you through and show you how to write an entire IEP. So let's go ahead and get into it. Hello, if you're new here, my name is Rachel from the Behavior Check-In. I'm a behavior coach teacher in Florida. I have been teaching for 9 years, writing IEPs during those times. I have written IEPs in several different states. So today I'm going to take you through and show you how to write the present levels of an IEP and show you how I do it. Now, full disclaimer, I may not do it exactly the way that your county district wants it done, but if you were looking for a general idea, best practice of how to go ahead and do this to make sure that you're doing what's best for the student and what is compliant with the law, then I will give you the best tips that I have. But of course, if you need more clarification, ask the compliance person or admin at your school for more clarification. But this will get you started, especially if you're coming in as a brand new teacher and you're totally lost and you don't know where to begin. I put this video together because I would have loved to have had something like this at the beginning of my teaching career. I had a binder that I could look through and see examples, but sometimes it's nice to have someone explain it to you if that's how you learn. So my plan for today is to put everything on the screen, kind of show you. I created a template just in Google Docs. I couldn't use the actual template from my district because of issues with privacy. So I compiled something that is very similar to what my district has used when I was in Virginia and when I was in Mississippi and Florida. So I tried to keep it as broad and generic so that it would be the most help to you. And I wanted to give you kind of a heads up. I've already typed everything in there because I didn't want this video to be long and monotonous where you just saw me typing stuff. That sounded really boring. So I wanted to show you what I put in there and how I do this. So just something that you want to have when you're getting ready to start your present levels, which is the first part of the IEP, you're going to want to make sure that you have data on your student. I always tell everybody to read the previous IEP first, look at where the student left off, look at where we're looking to grow. You're going to do this based off of the data that you have for that student, work samples, and teacher and parent input, as well as special input that they work with. Any specialists that might be working with that student, you want their input as well. So when I'm starting an IEP, I do not wait until the last minute. I put everything on a calendar and I really start getting everything ready for my students' IEP meetings, usually a month ahead of time. I find that this makes things a lot easier for me and it gives me enough time to gather my information, and also gives my other collaborators that work with the student opportunity to put their time, effort, and thought into it. Because that is a key to a really good IEP, is the thought that goes into it and making sure it is what is best for the student to help them be successful. Remember, an IEP is there to help the student meet their needs, and it's scaffolding to help them grow. Our ultimate goal is for our student to not need an IEP anymore, but in the meantime, it is to put those steps in place so they can be successful and access the Gen Ed curriculum and have what they need. It really is a how-to guide for the student. So we really want to treat it as such by making sure that it's thorough and accurate, and everyone who is a stakeholder with the child has their say in it. Also, if the child is older and they understand, usually when we get to the junior high level, I like to include them in developing this, but I have included my elementary school students in this as well. You just do it in an age appropriate way, and a lot of times I'll do a survey with them, which I have one that's linked in my TPT store. You can check that out, and just an interest inventory with them so you can find out what they want to do, their goals and whatnot moving forward. So how I normally plan it out is a month before, I send out a survey to the teachers that work with the student, the specialist that works with the student. I sit down with my student, I do the survey with them, and I also call the parents and I talk to them about any concerns, questions, things that they would like to discuss before the meeting. I usually compile all of this into just a Google Doc. I like to do everything in Google Docs because I have been burned so bad by computer systems where things have deleted. So when you have them in a Google Doc, it's nice to keep it there all nice and neat and organized. That way, if something disappears, a computer crashes, whatever, you have it backed up somewhere else. You can just copy and paste, put it back in, no big problem. We're gonna go ahead and jump into what I have set up. I'm gonna show you what I have, and obviously you do these over time, you get better at them, and you kind of get used to the wording of how you do things. My suggestion would honestly be to make like a template of certain phrases that you use and then plugging in the appropriate information for the student that is personalized and applicable to them, and then you can copy and paste it in there. That makes it a lot easier as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into it.
All right, so here's the template that I put together to kind of show you how I do IEPs. Like I said, this is kind of just a accumulation of the different types of IEP programs that I've worked in, and then I just moved it over to a Google Doc. But just an idea, it can help you. This is not meant to be gospel, but if you are a new teacher and you've never seen an IEP before, you've never written an IEP before, this should give you a jumping off point. Of course, always talk to your district county people and get exactly what they want. A lot of times they'll give you like a template. You can also look over the student's previous IEP to get an idea as well, but I just kind of want to show you what I do. So hopefully it can just give you a little bit more comfort. That's my goal. So up in here, this would be like the demographics section that we have up here. Usually that is put in automatically by the like program system that you have, but I always like to go in and double check just to make sure that everything is correct in the way that it's supposed to be, because sometimes it does mess stuff up. And then of course you have the IEP, reeval, review date. Generally, you will go ahead and you will put in the date that you are holding the meeting. Always make sure you schedule your meetings in advance if you have to schedule them. I usually try to schedule them a month out. That way I can get the IEP home to the parents for review, usually 10 days prior to the meeting. I also like to get the IEP out to all the parties that are involved with the student, because it's good to have lots of eyes on it so they can look at it, have their input, catch anything that I might have missed, because we are just one person and we have a lot of paperwork to do. So things do happen, things get messed up. Heck, you might even catch some stuff as I'm going through on here, because that's just how it works. So I like to have my drafts done way ahead of time. That way we have time to fix any errors. And then of course, sometimes things still happen, and that's why you hold amendments, but we try to do our best right out the gate. So that's what you put in there. You would put in the date, and then of course the review date would be the next year and then the day before. That way you still have enough time to stay in compliance, so you aren't out of compliance for their IEP. Usually this auto-populates. Just always double check, make sure it's correct, because accidents happen. Technology is not perfect. Then exceptionality, so the student will always have a primary exceptionality. Some states are different. Some have primary, secondary, and tertiary. Some of them only have primary. Some of them only have primary and speech, OT. You get it. It is just an exceptionality under IDEA. This particular made up, completely 100% fictional student, cannot stress that enough, has an emotional behavior disability. Why? Because that's what I work with, and it's easiest for me to put together a fictional IEP based on that. But you could have them with the, another eligibility of speech or OT. But there's just, there's emotional behavior disabilities, there's visual, there's other health impairment, specific learning disability, autism, intellectual disabilities. So you can check out all of those if you just want to do a Google search. Your student will come with one when they have their eligibility meeting. Sometimes if you get an IEP that you have to write directly from an eligibility, you'll see all of that. It is listed when they do the eligibility determination. And a lot of times this is auto-populated as well by your system, but if not, same rule goes. Always go in and double check, and you can also enter it if you need to. And then the services, this section over here, I promise you, is going to just vary on how your county, state likes to do things. So take this with a grain of salt. I have worked in places that do IEP seasons, where we do all of our IEPs in the spring, or we do all of our IEPs in the fall, or I've had just rolling dates where we do them as they come due. Both have their pros and their cons. I think it's stressful no matter which way you do it. It just always seems to be that way. It always seems to be feast or famine when it comes to how much paperwork you have to do. So I don't have a preference, but currently where I'm at, we do them as they come in. when I worked in other states. Like I said, we had an IEP season, and this is just kind of how they like us to write ours. Always double check and make sure you're putting the minutes the way they like to have them written and put in. They usually will give you some sort of a guide sheet. This student, just for the sake of ease for me, he's all self-contained. If you know me, you've been following my channel, I'm a big believer in inclusion, but just for the sake of me putting this together, I put him in all self-contained just to explain it to you, because it probably look a lot different if he was going out for other classes. But you want to just kind of put in the start date, then you're going to put when it ends, so it's generally the school year. We have services A, current school year, and then we'll go into services B. So then we'll like kind of project what we think they might be for the following year. Of course, we always have meetings throughout the year, so things like that do change, but it's just kind of our projection. Like I said, I wouldn't dwell on this because it's going to be so different based on your district, but it's just putting in the minutes and services that they get. So now we are on to the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This is the part where I think a lot of teachers get really, really scared. It is because it's a lot of information and it is very much like writing a research paper. Because honestly, once you start to write these and you get the structure of how they go pretty quickly. And there's a various way you can do them, and people have their preference. Some people like to get in great detail and almost write a case study on the student. Some people just like to put the nuts and bolts in there. There's really no right or wrong. It's just the most important thing is making sure that your stuff is evidence based off of like data, assessment data, that it's something that you're measurable. So it can't just be all your opinions and, oh, he's a sweet little boy that likes to color. Like it needs to have actual information where someone can measure the progress of the student, where you could actually see where they're having growth. So I'm not going to read through all of this. I'll give you the highlights over here. This is just stuff, once again, that I made up and I threw in there to give you an idea. But in the beginning, right over here, we have our present level. So this is supposed to be just exactly where the kid is, just the nuts and bolts. Like they can do this. This is where they landed on their test. They're near grade level, they're near standard, they're not where they scored high. As you can see, I'm using like his state testing data to put it in there. Some places might use iReady. It depends on what you have, but this is where you're going to want to use like your current state, local, district assessments. Like I said, your state testing, your iReady, that kind of stuff, your progress monitoring, if you use any kind of specialized curriculum, that is all going to be listed in there. All their baseline scores, all their mid scores, and all their year-end scores or whatever is what you're going to have in there to reflect. You're going to show where they start and then kind of where they end, any kind of growth that we had from that. That's what you're going to do for academic support. All right, we go into our social emotional. If your student has social emotional needs, they may not. Not all students you're gonna have to fill out every domain. So for this student, because we're gonna say his primary deficits are academic and social emotional, that's why I have things listed in these two areas. But let's say he wasn't academic, like he wasn't social emotional, he was just academic and maybe he was speech language. Then you would have a spot down here for speech language. Speech therapists would put that in there. I didn't fill out these at the bottom. I didn't want to confuse you all, but when you do the IEPs, there's going to be academic, social, emotional. There's going to be a spot for like speech language, OT, any of that kind of stuff. That's going to go over there that can be filled out, just kind of where the student is and the services that they get. So like I said, just for that, I put this in there. For social, emotional, I put in, we do the Berks where I'm at, but it's different every place I've been. And then I just it's a rating scale, and you can put that in. You can often get that information either by doing that by yourself, or you can pull this information from their eligibility paperwork. They'll have different assessments that they do in there. Also, anything that you may have from the teacher, if they're in the classroom, like we use the level system, that's something that you could potentially use. You talk about where they are, what level they're on, and the progress that they've made throughout the year. Maybe they started off the year on level 1, and then they ended up the year on level 3, which is a good thing, and they showed a lot of growth. You can indicate that, but we're not going to get into like the flowery stuff here on the growth. This is just the nuts and bolts, the numbers, and this part of the current level of academic functional performance. So if we move on to student strengths, I always love to start my IEPs out with the student strengths. And I like to kind of make sure that the parent knows that, the good things about their child. And so we start off with the strengths first. So I listed each domain that maybe they struggle in, because you may not always have someone who you're listing a domain for math if they don't have a math need or a reading need. Same, like I said before, if they don't have social emotional, that would be listed. Maybe this is speech, maybe it's OT, whatever, then that would be down there. But like I said, for the student, we're doing math, reading, and social emotional. So this would be based off of current classroom data, IEP data. I mentioned the previous goal that we had before, that the student mastered the previous goal. I listed that he does his best work when he's in a small group setting and has limited distractions, and he's able to complete his academic work independently when he is given his visual aids, his accommodations. He does well. And then, of course, I go in and I address in reading. That's based off of his current classroom data, observations, testing, all of that. He is able to identify the central idea of 75% accuracy. He has mastered that goal. The reason I'm talking about goals is because we're going to be using this in my next part of this series and talking about how we're going to create our goals. So it is important to see where the student started and where we're going next with it. So I listed, where he was at, that he mastered that goal. So our next step is going to be moving up. I put in that he does like writing. He really likes to write creative writing, song lyrics. He's my kid. This is my made-up student, of course. He's my made-up kid who writes all the raps in the back of class. And they're probably inappropriate, but it's humorous. All right. So that's kind of how I'm going to word it in the IEP. Also, once again, that he benefits from small group instruction and reading, and that he does work really well for fidget breaks, and he does respond really well to behavior supports such as timers for his work tasks, and setting up the clear expectations and endings using a lot of verbal praise and encouragement. He's one of those kids that really needs to hear he's rocking and rolling all the time. I think it's important to put that in there. Once again, we're going to come back and use that for other parts of the IEP. It's one reason I like to list it. It's really good when you have the IEP that you can go back and look at the goals and the accommodations and see in the present levels where that was listed as something that you needed. So you can tell they all kind of paint the whole picture of the child. And then for social emotional, we're talking about his strengths again. I know sometimes with some of our kids it can be hard, but this is the chance to really reflect on the things that we are doing. Maybe we're not perfect, but like I said, he is starting to advocate when he needs a break. He's starting to ask for breaks. He's starting to use the designated break area instead of eloping to the bathroom. So he's going to, the place that you've agreed upon. Maybe, you'd had a meeting previously and you talked about that. And that's kind of referencing back to that. He will use the break cards. He's very motivated by his behavior point sheets, by listing the accommodations and interventions that are helpful for him. That can be in there. You can elaborate on this as much as you need to. I kept it pretty generic because I didn't think you guys wanted to look at an entire book. But, I think sometimes the more specific, the better, especially if you have a student who is transitioning on to another school, like maybe they're going from elementary to junior high or junior high to high school or something along those lines, because I think that can be really helpful if you have a kid who's going to be moving. But I always think it's very good to be in detail. You never know. You may think you're going to have the kid the next year, and then you go to a different position. So you want to have an IEP that's very clear to everybody who works with that child. All right. So student needs. And when I go into this part of the IEP, I always tell parents, okay, so this is the part why we're all here for this meeting. We're going to be talking about the areas where your child is needing extra help. And I always preface it that way because that is the purpose of the meeting. Like, it's great to talk about all the great things that they're doing, but we do need to talk about the needs. That is why we have an IEP. So once again, based off of classroom data, district-wide baseline assessments, observations, that sort of thing, you put in where he's struggling with information of comprehension of informational text and vocabulary. Once again, I made this all up, but his current Lexile, if your county district uses that, and then where he fits on that. Always put things in parent-friendly language. They don't always understand it, and teachers across content may not always understand what you're referencing in there. So, like I said, I put in there a 1.5 below grade level, and I might even clarify that even more than I'm looking at a 1.5 grade levels below or something along that, just to make it a little bit more clear. That sort of thing is very helpful to parents or any other people who work with the child in understanding where they are academically and behaviorally in relation to same age peers. And then, of course, I put this little note in there that he can get really anxious when reading, and he does not like to read in front of his peers, but he will read a one-on-one with a teacher assistant. I think this is important to note because if this is something that leads to behavioral outbursts or shutdowns, then that's something that the teacher should know, because maybe they can work out a plan once they build that rapport with the student on when they're comfortable. That way you can kind of limit some of that stuff. But then going into math, you can also, it's the same as we did up there before, just kind of put where they struggle. And this is helpful because you're going to be using everything that you put in the needs is going to end up becoming a goal. So think about that when you're placing it in there and how you're going to put that in a goal and measure that as well. That's just something to keep in mind. So or goal or accommodation. If we know that he struggles with multi-step math problems, then we're going to probably need to do some sort of goal that reflects that. And then, of course, visual aids do help the student in remembering the required steps. And then for social emotional, I like to describe the behaviors that we see. Sometimes you don't always have to do this, but sometimes it's important to know, if there was any disciplinary action that happened, especially a lot of times with some of our kids that are on behavior plans, because their plans follow specific steps. Sometimes, if you have to indicate these in there, then it's important to know that you had to go beyond that and the disciplinary action happened. So it is important to indicate. And then I always put in there that they do require the supports if they're in a self-contained classroom, what kind of self-contained classroom they're in, or if they get pulled out from gen ed for any reason, I put that in there and why. There'll be a separate part where you kind of put the least restrictive environment, but these are the things that we are doing to help this student with these behaviors. He also requires special transportation, put that in there. One thing I didn't add, and I'm seeing it, this is why, once again, real life, why I would sit down with people and share it with people and reread it again is because sometimes you miss things. And there's been times in meetings where I've noticed that I needed to add something, and that's fine too. So I would probably put in there, of course, he needs the social skills class as well to help him with his peer relationship, because I don't think I put that in there. Oh, nope. I did. I'm sorry. But I'm saying in general, if you do miss something, no stress. You can always put it in there in the meeting too if you need to, because it happens. And then, of course, assessments. I made this all up, but it's just a general idea. You can put in whatever your district tests are. Like this is the state testing data, or you could put in their iReady or STAR or whatever you use. Put all of that in there and elaborate the way that you think you need to. But this is just showing where you got the information from. Same with the rating scale on the Berks. This just kind of explains it in more detail down there that they can reference, but it doesn't fill up the entire top part, because I think that can get very monotonous. I think sometimes breaking it down in this part helps a little bit. So someone could look over that and it makes it a little bit more clear for them. So, and then we have the justification of how the disability affects the progress in the general education curriculum. And this is just why do they need the supports and services that they have. Issues, they have reading deficits, math deficits, and some behavior deficits. And just kind of list those in there on how they impede the academic progress and why they need the supports that you offered. And then, of course, any medical conditions, medication, is going to be classroom accommodations and testing accommodations and goals. So make sure that you are liked and subscribed so you can check out that next video feature.
All right, so hopefully this example was helpful to you in your IEP writing process. Of course, if you have any questions, you can leave them below and I will do my best to answer them, or answer them in my next video or live if it's something that you would like me to directly address. I would be happy to do that. I love to build and work with my community. Also, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe and like, and stay tuned for my next video where we'll be talking about writing goals and accommodations. Thank you so much, and I will catch you in the next one.